Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons; Donell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education; and Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. I'm Stacy Hurst, and I'm joined by Lindsay Kemeny and Donell Pons. And those of you who've been listening this season know that we have been focusing on the Perspectives on Language and Literacy 75th anniversary issue published by the International Dyslexia Association. And this episode, we are actually wrapping up this season. So we have the opportunity to discuss the things that we've learned from this publication and throughout our season, and just talk about some of the high points for us. We've had some fantastic guests, and this is the first time we've done a theme for the whole season, right? We've done some series before, but this has been a really unique thing for us, and I personally have loved it. Donell, Lindsay, what are some of your feelings about how this season was?
It was so fun to have a theme and do something different this season. So I love it that we could kind of dive deep into this great issue. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to kind of explore. And, you know, it forces me to kind of read more deeply as I'm reading these different articles. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity and the discussions we've had.
Yeah. Donell, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was really fun to be able to look at structured literacy again like this, and to have each aspect. There was a really good expert or someone to comment on it. And it was nice to pull those pieces apart, see the whole and pull it apart. And it's nice to have, I think, a reevaluation, if you will. So there were some folks who are very familiar with structured literacy, have probably known the term and followed folks for years. And there are others who may be new to it. But so this new examination was nice. And then to link that to some of the infograph or info map resources that IDA is putting out there as well, so that you can go to the website, you can click on, as we've talked about before, and we will again, you can click on various aspects of structured literacy in the info map and get additional information. And Stacy, you pointed out many times they keep uploading, and that's great. And so we'll keep checking back to see what they keep adding to that. So I think it was really nice that way to be able to explore everything that they're trying to put into this and then re-examine structured literacy.
Yeah. And Donell, I think we should acknowledge that this was your idea, and we're glad that you had it, because for all the same reasons you guys said, it gave us all a chance to kind of refine, revisit, and learn a little bit more about it. I know that right at the beginning of the issue, it gives the history of the term structured literacy, which I think is worth noting. And I think it's important for those of us in education to understand that history. The term has only been in existence since 2014. But there is something on page 6 of the physical edition that I thought kind of summed up nicely how I guess we all should move forward in this space as educators. But they said, as science advanced, IDA evolved. As we evolved, our vision sharpened. And I think that's what this season has helped me to do too. Sharpen my vision and understand that evolution that we've come through in regards to reading instruction. Also new for our podcast is the fact that we have had more guests this season than we have in the past. So we have a lot to talk about. And just right off the top of your heads, I guess, did you guys have some memorable moments for you this season?
I loved interviewing Margaret Goldberg, having her on. She is, she's a friend of mine because we met back in 2019, or I think it was 2019. And I just respect her so much. She is working in the schools as a literacy coach right now. And so it's so interesting to hear her perspective and her day to day because she's living it. And I love hearing her story of how she transitioned from balanced literacy to, kind of doing these experiments in her classroom and learning more about structured literacy and the science of reading. I just think she's a wealth of knowledge. So that interview definitely stands out for me, but it's hard. It is hard to pick just one. I'll let Donell go, but we had so many amazing guests this season.
Yeah, we did. I think that's a highlight for me would be all of the guests, because I think each one brought something very interesting, unique perspective. As you say, Lindsay, Margaret is always a treasure. She's very fun to listen to. She condenses things down so well. Her practical knowledge is so deep. And so if you didn't get to hear that one, I highly recommend. And then David Herford was one that maybe a lot of folks are not familiar with the work of David Herford. And he's a researcher. He's been at this for a long time, and he had a lot of information to share. It was one of those interviews where you don't really interview, but rather he just gives you the whole thing. And it was great. We didn't want to interrupt. And it was interesting because I had somebody email me after who said, I was delighted. I had never heard of David Herford before, but wow, what a wealth of information. And he really is just about all of the aspects of trying to turn literacy around, because he's been involved in, of course, working with different states on their legislation. So he was able to bring that piece in. And then also a little bit of history as to why he was interested in studying this particular thing, which was interesting as well. So I think that was an interesting one for folks who maybe aren't familiar with him. And then again, Louise Spear-Swerling, cannot say enough. She's always so good at condensing very difficult things down into very understandable pieces. And she's also very good at keeping track of what's different between structured literacy and business as usual or a whole language model. She's one of the best at that, I think. And then additionally, Kate Kane was new for me anyway. I hadn't really been very familiar with Kate Kane's work, coming out of a different sort of, university ecosystem, but very, very interesting information about comprehension. So yeah, I think there were a lot of different things this year that were delightful.
They are just such powerhouses in this field, and I always love listening to them. I think they're really dynamic speakers, and what an honor to have them on.
And I think their topic areas too, and Dr. Cardenas-Hagan about teaching students who may not speak English as their first language. And I love this whole structured literacy model, the info map, and it helps me identify areas that I need to learn more about. And I know I have a list of things I want to continue to learn about based on their work. I personally, meeting Louise Spear-Swerling was the highlight of my career. I've read so much of her research before, even back when I was more in the balanced literacy phase of my teaching, because that's all we knew. So it was just delightful to have a conversation with her. And if you've listened to the episode, you know how much she knows. And the fact that we cannot overlook teacher knowledge, that has got to be front and center. Professional development is really important for what we're doing. And I know that was kind of came full circle considering where I am in my career right now. It really helped me go to work the next day being even more dedicated to making sure my pre-service teachers know what they need to know. And then as far as the issue goes itself, did you guys have any important takeaways that you maybe refined your thinking or you highlighted as something interesting to you?
Oh, there's so many things. I do want to say I really loved Kate Kane's article and her interview. I wasn't able to be there. I was teaching during that time, and but listening to it, that is one that I want to go back and listen again. And I think I want to read the article and then listen to her again. But I loved her article about how structured literacy integrates comprehension and composition, how important it's something we don't talk about as often, maybe. I mean, we do now, but But okay, important takeaways to your point, your questions, Stacy. I hope that everyone takes away that from all of these articles that systematic and explicit instruction is the most reliable method for teaching word reading and comprehension. It talked about that in one of the articles. I think it was Reed Lyons and Margaret Goldberg's article. But I just think, I hope like coming away from that, that is a big takeaway and that readers see that. Yes, because we still get, I think so many in the schools are still thinking, oh, this discovery based or, well, it's when we lead our teaching with a discovery based model, we're leaving out so many students. If they could discover it, then they would have already, right? And so just to give the best chance for everyone is to teach them explicitly and directly from the beginning. And I just think that's one of my huge takeaways.
I love that, Lindsay. I think that is key too. I'm going to yes to that. And then add also, it was in the article by Barbara Wilson. And that was a rather extensive one because in Barbara Wilson's article, she went over the whole thing in the map and tried to give us the overview. But within that, there was something really interesting. And it was a line that came out of there. Structured literacy may include a program to facilitate teaching certain skills like word recognition, spelling, etc., explicitly, like Lindsay said, systematically. But supported trained teachers drive, this is the important piece, guys, that we talked about a lot, the integration of instruction. I mean, that was another key word that kept coming up again and again as we looked at structured literacy was integration of those skills. And I love how they pointed out a well-trained teacher supported, we talked about Margaret Goldberg's interview and conversation, is essential to driving all of those pieces. So that was great.
I agree, Donell, 100%. And as I was looking at the info map, I was thinking how comprehensive it is, not only the who, the what, the how, and the why, but they've really outlined what each of those sections mean. And looking at the how, you kept mentioning, I think we mentioned this throughout the season, the word integrated kept coming up no matter what we're talking about, that we're not teaching any of these skills in isolation, right? Nothing is in isolation. And then even on the how, under that direct and systematic, like you were saying, Lindsay, everybody benefits from that. Exactly what that means: explicit, sequential, cumulative, multimodal, and all of those things do not lend themselves to isolation. They have to be integrated. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I had another thing that was like, I was thinking about from all these articles. And again, Donell, you were talking about Barbara Wilson's article. In hers, she said, talking about this research behind this info map and the science of reading, that it's not new, but always evolving. And I really loved that. And then in Reed Lyon, Margaret Goldberg's article, they said, science doesn't take sides. It illuminates a path. I love that visual. Science illuminates a path. And like, we need to be careful not to succumb to confirmation bias, which is so easy. We're all guilty of it at times, I think. And just encourage ourselves and others to stay open, stay curious. I think that's really important because it is just like Barbara Wilson says, science is always evolving. So we're always going to be deepening and refining our knowledge. And there's things that we don't know now that we need to be open to when we find out more about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the science illuminates the path and at the same time requires of us to be open to new research and integrating it into what we already know.
Interested in diving deeper into today's episode and exploring more literacy topics? Join us in the Science of Reading Collective, where we host the Literacy Talks podcast chat. It's the perfect place to share insights, ask questions, and keep the conversation going. But that's just the beginning. When you join the Science of Reading Collective, you're stepping into a vibrant, dynamic community explicitly designed for literacy champions like you. Access decodable texts, sound wall resources, and professional learning in our AI-enhanced community, all brought to you absolutely free. Find us at collective.readinghorizons.com. Join the Science of Reading Collective today and be part of a movement that's eradicating illiteracy. That's collective.readinghorizons.com.
What about important takeaways for our listeners? What would you say would be something that you would recommend?
Well, I think we've talked about it. And so I would highly recommend that you can access this article free if you have not had the opportunity. So it's always there. So in other words, if you're overwhelmed right now, it sounds like a lot to take on. Don't worry. It's free. You can access it when you have time, and then come at it a piece at a time. If there was one thing that interested you, maybe you heard Lindsay talking about Margaret Goldberg conversation, you think, I can start there. Start there. So that's one thing I think I want people to take away is this is not going anywhere. So it will be available. If you haven't had an opportunity to be able to come in contact with it in a way that is okay for you, and then to come back to it. So I may have already listened, maybe I read, but hey, maybe I've lost contact with some of those thoughts that I had at the beginning, or now that you're mentioning it, maybe I'm interested in going back. So come back again, it will be here. It's a resource that's there for you. So I want people to always remember that, hey, if I didn't get an opportunity to do it, it's okay. You'll have a chance to do it. The other thing that I want to point out too that I thought was fantastic, we talked about integration, and we've talked about how key that is with the structured literacy and the info map pointing that out so well. But it was something in Kate Kane's article, and again, it was present over the whole thing. So it's not to say she's the only one, but in it she points out those 4 key areas of writing composition and comprehension, and there are 4 key areas of instruction that have been researched. She talks about, and 1 is vocabulary and background knowledge, 2 is sentence structure and grammar, 3 is knowledge and use of text structure, and 4 is critical thinking skills. Think how big these buckets are for one. Just right there, think how big the buckets are. Such as inference and comprehension. That's all part of critical thinking skills. And then monitoring, right? That's also part of that. And she says, now think about all of that when we're talking about reading a passage and having to access all of those. That's why the integration piece, again, if the integration kind of, you thought, that's what we're talking about, is when all of that is integrated, and then you get to reading the passage and how the layers and depth of understanding can be yours. That's what that means. And also tells us where our work is, where the hard work lies, right? Still.
And writing a passage, right, Donell?
Yes. And writing
all
a
those
passage.
things too. And then even harder because you're thinking about the spelling and the physical act of either writing or typing. And
yeah, absolutely. But here's what's interesting, Lindsay, and I'm glad you pointed that out, is that oftentimes when students aren't able to get to a deep understanding of a passage, the comprehension isn't quite there. We move on and expect them to write regardless, right? We don't understand. We do not give it its due that those two things are so connected. And so oftentimes it should be no surprise that when you wind up in a writing class, the student who is struggling to understand a passage is sitting there struggling. So I really appreciate you bringing that up because that's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's no wonder that Kate Kane just won the Hollis Scarborough Award. And I think that speaks to kind of what you were talking about earlier too, Lindsay, with Margaret Goldberg and Reed Lyon, the fact that these partnerships become so powerful in application.
Absolutely. And then to answer your question, Stacy, on another takeaway, I kind of jumped ahead, I think, because I was sharing, I want teachers to take away this importance of this explicit and direct instruction. Additionally, I hope that from looking at the info map and listening to this season of our podcast, that you'll see that, hey, structured literacy is a lot more than phonics. There's a lot more going on, and you just take a look at that map and you can see that because all those components are listed. And so when you hear, an admin or another teacher or something incorrectly state that, oh, it's just about phonics, but we need more than that, you can be like, yes, we do need more than that. And the science of reading supports that. Look at this info map. This kind of shows it. And then another takeaway is just that there is extensive scientific research that children need proficiency in all these different domains. So all these different reading related language domains that are in that map.
Yeah, well said. I also, as you were talking, was thinking, we're talking about integration and that it's so much more than just phonics. And to know that if somebody is misrepresenting what structured literacy is, or if you are made to use a program or you have input on a program selection, knowing that these elements need to be addressed is important as well, and giving feedback on that. And I think this really helps. It also kind of helps give an outline for PL, professional learning or professional development too, areas that we can focus on. Just as I read all the articles, and then towards the end, when we heard when Tim Odegaard's article about MTSS, and we had a whole episode on that. But I was thinking back to my time as a classroom teacher, and I don't think, just because of the requirements of the day, of every day, I wasn't thinking systemically necessarily. I was way concerned, obviously, about what was happening in my classroom. But there is a system to structured literacy that is not, we're not teaching in a classroom in isolation either. There are administrations and administrators and structure within our school and district that we should be looking for as well, and supporting and participating in. So I know that our default is to come at this from the teacher perspective, but also as administrators to think about this, the info map, or just the structure of structured literacy and the MTSS aspect of it. That is important for assessment. That's important for intervention and how you support your teachers in applying all of these things. So maybe think more systemically would be something that I have taken away from this.
You know, Stacy, it's interesting you should bring that up, because I was thinking about in the Louise Spear Swirling conversation, and we were talking about the reader profile. And that was one of the things that came up, and she's so good at that. So if you get a chance, if you haven't listened, listen to that. And then there was also, we talked about how each of us own at least one or all of some of the books that she's put out. And one is the Structured Literacy Planner, among others. But that's heavily the reader profile, and she leans into assessment and what to do with those assessment pieces. So that dialogue between the teacher and the classroom, who needs information and really good information to be putting together the best instruction for students, the dialogue between that teacher and administration, whether that be building level and then out from there district level, is really important. The up and down of that communication and the back and forth of that communication to know, hey, we in good faith selected something we thought would be helpful or useful, and to get feedback and to have ways in which teachers can give feedback. Because that's another thing too, is to show up to meetings or spaces where teachers are in their classrooms, because that's where they're at, right? They don't have a lot of leeway that way. So setting a meeting or a location or a time in which teachers are able to give the feedback, I think is really important too. So I love that. That's part of the conversation.
Yeah. That's great. I think about that even with school board meetings. I always had great intentions to attend, but at the end of a day, you have so many other things to attend to that it makes it kind of hard. I was also thinking, as you were talking, Donell, just how powerful this common framework and language could be within a school or a district for the students. And I was having a conversation this morning, actually, with a student. And I said, personally, as a teacher, I would not just send my students to intervention without knowing what they're doing. There needs to be a lot of communication between the person providing that intervention and myself as the classroom teacher. And this kind of a framework gives everybody common knowledge. And we're focusing on that data, right? Data-driven is a key aspect of what structured literacy is. I think that's going to serve the teachers and the student. Well, anything else that you have thought about differently or refined your thinking as we have gone through this season and had all the great conversations we've had about this issue?
Something that Reed Lyon and Margaret Goldberg mentioned, that we need collaboration between scientists and classroom teachers. They said it's non-negotiable. So I just want, I guess, everyone listening to really think about that in your space, what you can do to help that collaboration. I think as teachers, I think we need more teachers speaking up and sharing the wonderful things that they're doing in the classroom. And I don't think, I feel like sometimes we have this attitude where we hold up the researchers on a pedestal and it's like, come and learn at their feet, when it needs to be more equal footing. And I think we need to give as much respect to the teachers, because obviously I'm a little biased since I am a teacher, but the teachers are doing, it's hard work what they're doing. And when you have teachers who are doing it well, we need to hear from them. And I love when I see that collaboration and I see that respect, because I've seen that a lot too, where there's amazing researchers who are getting in the classrooms or when they're presenting, have a teacher voice in there, or, acknowledge that. Like, I loved when I went to Dr. Widjikamar's, I remember her presentation at the Reading League, and she brought with her the teachers and the school leader at the school that were implementing what she was talking about. So they were there if you wanted to go ask questions at the end. And I think she had one talk for a little bit. And I love to see that collaboration and kind of acknowledgement that we do need to hear from both. And I think if we want this work to move forward, we need to be talking more about implementation, and teachers are the implementation scientists, right? Like Dr. Hogan said that last year at Big Sky. So anyways, I love that they mentioned that in their article, and I would love to see more collaboration. They're both so needed. We so need the research and the researchers and experts explaining that. And we so need the teachers helping us with what they're doing in the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's great, Lindsay. I loved hearing that and summing that up so well. And it also made me think about there's sometimes a voice that I don't always hear in the space that I think is important. And that's from the folks who are receiving additional instruction outside of a school setting because they're not able to get enough. And I think when we get a handle on just how many kids whose parents are able to, because they have the means, who are getting that kind of additional support outside the school because there just isn't enough happening in the school, I think our eyes will be widely opened. Tim Odegaard sort of touches on this a bit, particularly in his article and then in Conversations, is just how much more a student with dyslexia needs. So I love that having these great conversations around supporting teachers and teachers being able to work with researchers. So we're getting somewhere in the classroom, which would be amazing for all students, not just for certain students, for all students. That's another thing we need to remember. Everybody benefits when you have that kind of collaboration and really good instruction happening in a classroom. But then I'd also love to see us kind of try to measure, because I don't know that we ever will or how much additional effort is being put forth by folks who thankfully have the means or able to find it in order to help those kids who need that much more to be successful with things that are in the language realm. And I think that would be very interesting to open that because it's huge, as Tim touches for us on this sort of thing in a lot of the work that he does. That's a really interesting, and I want to see more of that conversation too. I think this is all great.
Yeah, and that's definitely an area of research that really can't afford to not include the classroom, or no matter what that instructional setting is. Yeah.
Right.
I think about just how much I have learned as a teacher because somebody was researching students who could not learn to read as quickly as others. And in reality, I think, I can't remember what page is on this, really terrible of me, but there is a part in this issue where it states that we have been taught to teach reading in a way that only affects the minority of our students, like a minority, like 30% of our students. But that's how we're taught to approach it. So without differentiation or data-informed assessment and instruction, then we are not going to move the dial for the majority of our students. When we're talking about that connection between research and practice, I know as a teacher, I could not do my job without researchers and the things that they help us to know. And then I'd like to see on the other side too, researchers knowing, and I think they know it, but a lot of research is not education friendly in a sense. Some is, but it's more like they think of it in a lab in highly controlled situations, which teaching is not. Right? Anybody who's taught knows that you have not as much control as you think over what a kid's going to do or say, or, when you're videoing a lesson and a kid chooses to pick his nose or whatever, like that's the messy reality. I'd love to see more research done with the classroom as the lab. I think that would be great. And I do think for teachers, oftentimes they're told about research, but you can reach out. If you have a university in your town, reach out to the education department, ask if they're doing any active research and if your students can participate, and you can collaborate with them to do that. And I'm sure district administrators could be having those conversations as well. That's a really great thing to emphasize for the future, right? That can continue to add to this evolving science. Any final thoughts?
My final thought is don't get overwhelmed. Try not to get overwhelmed. Start with one thing, right? One thing at a time.
Donell?
Yeah, I would just say, we pretty much said a lot of things, but just reemphasizing that the podcast isn't going anywhere. So if you haven't had a chance to listen, don't worry. You can come back and hit it where you can. So there's no sense of urgency or I missed it. You didn't miss anything. No FOMO. And then additionally, there is also a hard copy. So you can go back and say, boy, I'd really like to learn more about that. You can. So you can access that. And just remember the journey, right? It's partly the journey. And to remember where you are right now versus where you're going to be in a month, 6 months to a year. And I can't wait to see it. It'll be exciting.
I have loved this season. I love this issue that we've been focusing on, in large part because I feel like we do need to survey large fields, cultivate small ones, and this gives us the framework to do that. So like you guys are saying, don't feel overwhelmed. You have the framework, work within it. There are a lot of resources that they have made available. And of course, keep your eye on the science. Think like a scientist. Because I guarantee if we were to do the same type of episode in 10 years, we would be talking about something that has evolved in our knowledge and our learning, right? And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us this season. We really look forward to having you join us on future seasons of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.